Hello, my name is Rhonda Bender, and today I'd like to answer a very common question that we get in miniature painting, which is how much water to add to make a wash. But more than answering that specific question, I'd like to talk to you about how to think about questions like that and problems that you may face in miniature painting to try to find more of the answers yourself. And to do that, to help me do that, I've collected all the black paints that I own, and we're going to run a few tests and talk about how I think through problems like this. So I've lined up all my black paints here ready for testing. Most of the paint I own is from Reaper Miniatures. That's the paint that I use most often. And in some ways that will make for an interesting test, since we can test 4 different blacks made by the same company and see if they have differences when they dilute. But I also have Nocturna black, P3 black. These have been rebottled. I'll put links or a picture at some point with the original bottles, but this is the Chimera paint black, and this is Liquitex acrylic gouache black. And then I recently purchased this, which is golden so flat matte acrylics. So the Liquitex and the golden product are from the art store. They're not made for miniature paints, but as near as I can tell from studying the product descriptions of both companies in great depth, these 2 companies have essentially reinvented miniature paint. So they're meant to be flat fluid acrylics. So when you ask the question how many drops of water to add to a drop of paint to make a wash, most of the time people who ask that question are hoping for an answer of 3 drops of water to 1 drop of paint, and that's a great wash consistency. And sometimes you will get answers like that. Sometimes you will get answers like the one I would give you, which is it depends. Some pigments are much more potent than others. Some are much weaker. Just as you will find that you need to do more coats for a base coat with some colors, with those colors you wouldn't need to add as much water to turn them into washes. So here's an example I did previously. This is the paint full strength, and then these are each of those same paints with a drop of water added. The green's pretty much ready to go for a wash. Most of the others would need more water added. So how do you answer the question? And this is kind of how I would answer the question. I have another example over here of a working sheet that I have. Instead of asking how many drops of water to add, ask what is the result you want and add water to the paint and test it until you see if it's that consistency. So this is a sheet of me testing washes to make sure that they're the correct consistency before I put them on a miniature. You can also test on a test miniature. You just prime something or give something a coat of paint. You can test with your specific colors that you're using more. But what I'm going to do with the black paints is the same thing that I did with these colored paints. So in this case, different pigments were giving different results, but I thought it would be interesting to do the test again where it's all the same color. They may not be the same pigments. There is more than one black pigment, but chances are these are the same 1 or 2 pigments that have been used to mix these paints. And I suspect that we will find some of them become more transparent than others with the same amount of water added. And that's why it's better to test by the result you want than to have a formula of I always add 3 drops of water to 1 drop of paint to make a wash. Okay. So I will just demonstrate with one of them mixing a wash consistency. So this is Reaper's Pure Black. I'm going to add 1 drop of water. I've put water in a dropper bottle. Note that the drops aren't necessarily going to be exactly the same size because the paint fluid is more viscous than water. So I would actually put a drop beside it and kind of check for the size. You can use the end of your brush. You can use the wood end of your brush to make drops. So I've now got 2 drops of water in there that are about the same size as my drop of paint. Another way that I would test washes is I do like using a container like this. You can get an inexpensive plastic one with 10 wells in a circle for a couple of bucks at most craft or hobby or even big box stores. So you see as I start to bring the paint up, it's a little bit lighter It may or may not show up on video, I don't know. You can see a little bit of the white of the palette as it falls down. I'm going to zoom in a little. Let's see if we can see it better. So as I've stirred it, you can see a little bit where the paint starts to fall down from the white of the palette, how it's a little bit more transparent. It's like a lighter gray compared to the pool of paint. That's not really a wash consistency. That's too dark. It would fill in, you know, it would cover over too much of the paint. So I'm going to add another couple of drops of water. Reaper's Pure Black is, I think, the one with the most pigment in it, so I suspect we will find that it does take a little more to thin down. And now when I do that same test where I'm pulling it up the side, so I'm pulling it up the side, it falls down faster, but you can also see a lot more of the white of the palette as the paint flows down back into the main pool of paint. So now I'll try my test on my paper. Actually, I'll get this new fresh paper out. And what I tend to look for in my paper test is, can I see some of the text underneath, but I still see like not just a hint of color. A hint of color would be more of a glaze, but I do see a solid stroke of color, but I can clearly read the text underneath. And that's a wash dilution that I find will kind of fall into the crevices and add some shadows, but not cover over everything on the upper areas. You're still going to have to do dry brushing to bring back your mid-tone color with a wash like that, but it's kind of a nice middle ground. So that's kind of the way that I would test for wash. I would mix until I thought it looked right on my palette, and I've done this on a flat palette. You can use an old blister pack. There's lots of different ways you can mix this. I just thought this would be nice to show you kind of visual cues. And then I test on a piece of paper and see if I got it right or not. So now I want to test each of my black paints to see whether they dilute roughly equally or not. My guess is they will not, and that this is one of the reasons you can't give blanket advice on, you know, how many drops of water to add to a drop of paint. So I've got my paints lined up, and after I finish the video, I'm going to take a picture so that they're in the same order as the stuff on the palette and the stuff on the paper, and I'll add those pictures into the video so that you know what each of the paints is. But for now, my goal is I'm gonna have 2 drops for each color, one that's straight that I'll paint onto the paper, and then one that I'm gonna dilute. And I think in the case of the black, I'm gonna dilute it with 2 drops of water instead of 1 to make sure we see some transparency. Also, just a note that I shook all of these paints before I started the video, so you should shake your paints before you use them. I just didn't want you to have to listen to my mechanical shaker on the video. So I'm going to make that side the one I add water to, so I'm less concerned about the volume of paint that I get in the side that I'm just going to apply straight paint. So that was Reaper's Pure Black, which I believe Ann Forrester, the person who developed the paint, has said that that is the most pigmented of the Reaper Blacks. It's also true black pigment, where I think a couple of the others, this solid black actually has some other pigments in it. It's very slightly what they call a chromatic black. And the same is true of Dragon Black. So I think the solid is a slightly cool black, and the Dragon is a slightly warm. Just gonna keep some cat hair out of my palette. This is Besmara Black, which is from the Pathfinder collection, and I think it's a true black pigment. This is Nocturna's Outlining Black. So for these paints in a tub, I'm just going to use a little plastic stir stick to get the drop out. And try to make it roughly the same size shape as from the droppers. This is P3's, well, I spilt on it, so I don't know the exact name of their black, but whatever the pure black pigment is. Now, just a note on this pigment, before I started the video, when I opened this, the lid has broken, so I just had to keep it open for this. It had thickened up a lot. I've had this paint a long time, and I have not maintained it properly. So if it does not perform well in this video, do not hold that against the paint. That is on me for poor maintenance. And that's like a little more than a drop there, I think. Okay, this is the Chimera Carbon Black. And they're a rare company. You can't see the writing on here. But they're a rare company who indicates their pigments. So this is Pigment Black 7. Well, it's not rare in the art paint world. The Liquitex and Golden paints, I'm going to be able to tell you the pigment number 2. But it is unusual in the miniature painting world for companies to share their pigment information. So this is Liquitex Mars Black, which is PBK 11. So I mentioned in the beginning of the video that you can use more than one pigment to make black. And some of them are a little warmer, some of them are a little cooler, some of them will be a little more opaque or a little more transparent. Okay, that's definitely more than a drop. The Liquitex is a little more viscous than a standard miniature paint. And I believe that the Golden So Flat is as well. And this is PBK 7. So the Chimera and the Golden So Flat are made with the same pigment. They may not look exactly the same. When we look at them, I mean, it's black. They're probably going to look pretty the same. But they are made with the same pigment. And like the Liquitex, it's a little bit, just a hair more viscous, I think, than the average miniature paint. But then some miniature companies mix their paint a little more viscous as well. Okay, so now I'm going to add 2 drops to each of the pools and then stir it together. And you know what? I'm actually going to just get rid of this because it isn't flat enough. If it gets all over my table, it gets all over my table. So I'm just wiping the brush with my fingers after each rinse because it's very common for me to get a little drop of water up here, and to make the test as fair as possible between the 2 brands, or the comparison is similar as possible. We're not testing, none of these brands are going to fail. That's not what we're testing. But to make the comparison as similar between each of the paints, I want to make sure I didn't add any additional water other than what I added through the dropper bottle. So this is, I know that miniature painting can be very frustrating for people who are, you know, so-called left-brain thinkers, computer programmers, engineers, people like that. But you can take your left-brain tendencies and you can conduct experiments and design tests and figure out ways to answer questions about a lot of painting things. You don't have to just be an intuitive artistic person who just knows how to do stuff to succeed in doing this. Okay, so now I've got my paper. And you know what, I'm going to do it down here. So I'll take the full strength. I'm going to do the full strength for each of them first, since it's not on a wet palette. They are going to be drying a bit, and want to get to each of them before that happens. The other thing we may find with the thinning is that it's easier to tell when I was talking about this one's a little warm or this one's a little cool. Some of that's going to be easier to tell in the thin versions than it may be in the full strength versions. Okay, hopefully I got that right. So now I'm going to do the wash version, and I'm trying to take off a little excess to make sure that we're and I did see that I had a drop of water on my brush. Sure that was a fair enough amount of that, but it's going to look a little darker now because I did that. But okay, so let's see. I'm going to give these a minute to dry and then come back and we'll try to develop a few conclusions. So just to reiterate the experiment that I was doing, I had these 9 black paints. So I painted out a strip of each of them straight out of the bottle or pot. And then I took a drop roughly the same size and added 2 drops of water from a water bottle to the paint to see if all of the blacks thinned down about the same. And as you can quite easily see, they did not. So this is the Reaper Pure Black. 2 drops of water added to that is probably not enough to make a wash. This would likely cover over too much of your paint underneath. This is the Pathfinder Besmara Black. And it's possible that I goofed up somehow, but I think it just looks like it's not a very intense black, which can be nice. That's mixing with this color is probably going to be a lot easier than mixing with this color. You're going to find that you don't overpower the colors that you're trying to make darker when you mix with something with a black like this, or these other ones that are a little look lighter, that were more affected by the water, I guess, or took less water to be affected. So this is why you can't rely on a ratio to make a wash, because even if you take the exact same color, and these two are in fact the exact same pigment, it's written on the bottle, we know for sure that this is pigment black 7 and this is pigment black 7, and I would say this one is pretty close to wash consistency and this one is still too opaque, that it needs more water added. So just the nature of how paint is made is not as uniform as we might like it to be for something like a formula of I only need this much water to this much paint and I'll get a perfect wash every time. So instead I recommend doing a test like this on paper, or you'll just, as you get comfortable with painting and thinking about it that way, look at the consistency. When you have a wash you like, what does it look like on your palette? Use cues like that to make decisions about how to make a wash. And I think that the people that you think are natural or innate artists, or who don't seem to have as much trouble with this, I think they're doing this, they're just doing this kind of thing subconsciously. So they get used to how the paint behaves under their brush. You know, they'll be able to move it around and go, oh yeah, that's a wash consistency, that's good to go. And this one, no, that's too thick or too opaque. So use your left brain analytical skills to help solve the problems that you're having painting. Just think about asking different questions and trying to find tests and experiments to answer those questions, and I think you'll be a lot happier. If you enjoyed that and you would like to see more ideas for how to find your own answers to problems that you're having in painting, or join me for doing more experiments, I'd like to invite you to watch my upcoming Twitch show on Reaper Miniatures Twitch channel. I'll be airing on Mondays from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Time. Then the videos are available on demand on Twitch for, I think, 2 weeks after that, and Reaper Miniatures uploads them to their YouTube channel within a few days after they air. So if you aren't able to watch live and join in the chat and ask questions, you'll still be able to get the main information by watching the videos later. Also keep an eye on this channel. And also, if you go look at that website up there, I often write about miniature painting and share tips and color recipes and lots of other information at that site. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that I'll see you again.